So the session today, like I mentioned, is focused on my lessons in about 20 years in ed tech. Based on the color of my hair, you might think it was more, but I promise that while the Zoom touch up my face feature is helpful, it's not what I rely on to keep my youthful appearance. And I'm excited again to be here, part of this presentation today, and to be kicking off Innovate for day two. So a couple of housekeeping items. I do know and recognize that is a very busy time on campuses. I'm a podcaster as part of the roles that I've taken on in my career. So I totally get being your background noise. So I get it. If you need to multitask, if you're checking emails, feel free to kind of use me as your white noise to support your kind of critical thinking as we go. But with that said, as I'm presenting, be on the lookout for checkpoints. So when you hear the word checkpoint, what I'm going to ask you to do is come in and join the chat and be a part of a conversation. I'm just diving deeper on some of the key points that we're going to be talking about during the conversation today. So some items that we're going to discuss, so you can keep an eye on the items that are going to be most interesting to you as we're going through our morning together, or afternoon, I guess, depending on what time zone you're in. I'm afternoon Eastern time, just by a hair. Many of you, it's probably kicking off a good portion of your morning. We're going to talk a little bit about the adoption life cycle and how technology innovations drive a lot of our decisions, and how many times higher ed might be a little behind, like we like to believe. But we're at a point now where there is so much rapid movement in technology that it's probably not a good idea to use that excuse anymore, of higher ed taking its time or higher ed moving slow. We'll talk about the fear of failure and the failure paradox and the challenges that creates, as well as the innovation life cycle. And I'll touch on that when we get to it. I'll also talk a little bit about playing it safe and how that in and of itself is a form of risk. I think one of the things to really think about is the old saying going, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward, right? And there are so many opportunities for us to take advantage of innovation, especially with technology today, to really move ourselves forward and not be afraid to try new things under the challenges of feeling like, oh, we might get fired, right? And that's what I want to kind of break for a lot of folks today, is that mindset of not being afraid to try something new. And that's one of the lessons that I've learned throughout my career that I'll share here in a little bit. So I think one of the things to kind of go through, and I'll spend just a few minutes here for folks who I haven't met before, or might not be familiar with my background. I've worked in higher ed my whole career, but like many of you, I probably didn't come here because it was my career goal. I didn't go to college to become an admissions counselor. I surely didn't go to college to be a fractional CMO supporting ed tech companies, and I'll define what that is here in a minute. I fell into it in a lot of ways by accident and procrastination, right? My first job out of college wasn't in business. It wasn't in marketing. It was at a Boy Scout camp. I wanted to work at a camp up in northern Minnesota for the summer, where I had worked a couple of years prior to that while I was still in college. And I had an opportunity to have a leadership position there to execute on a program that I worked with for a very long time. And so I didn't want to go get a real corporate job or a real job, a quote unquote real job anywhere, because I wanted to gallivant in the woods of northern Minnesota. Yes, Mike, northern tier. And so that was my first job out of school. So to be able to accomplish that, though, I needed something lined up for the fall for after that. But it's really hard to do a job search while you're camping in a tent in the boundary waters of Minnesota, right? And so I was able to secure a job as an admissions counselor at my alma mater that started in August of that year. So that was my ticket to, great, I get to go play in the woods for the summer. And now I'm going to start working at the university in the fall. So I started as an admissions counselor there. And then, of course, like many of you, as I fell into that role, I liked the traveling. I liked the meeting people. I was, early 20s. And so it was a really great opportunity to kind of explore and see places and go places. The challenge for me at the University of Hartford was it was a 2-year contract position. I was a grad assistant, actually, pursuing my MBA. And then at the end of my program, there was no opening for a job because they were really good at retention of their staff at that point, because they sent all people like me on the road all the time, and they didn't burn out their full-time staff doing that work. And so I got a job down the road at University of New Haven, about 40 minutes south. where this is where I credit a lot of everything since for the experiences that I had there. My first boss in that role, his name's Kevin Phillips, who's now the vice president of enrollment at Lees McRae College in North Carolina. He allowed us as a staff to take risks, to try new things. He put me in charge of our social media, our digital engagement. I was our main contact for many of our digital marketing vendors and partners and lead generation partners. And that gave me exposure and visibility into a lot of things that I wouldn't have had if I just kind of kept my head down and did my job of reading applications. So for folks who are here today, one key lesson to think about is, what are you doing to put yourself out there to try new things or innovate new things specifically in your role? I think one of the other lessons that I learned from the VP who was there at the time, his name was Jim McCoy. His job, he said to us, if you get accepted to present at conferences, we will invest in that resource and time every single time, because it benefits your career and it benefits the institution for the visibility that we get in the marketplace. And that was immediately when I got over any type of trepidation or hesitation to go present at conferences, because they said, oh, my boss is going to pay for this whole trip, and there's a conference in Chicago and I want to go to a Cubs game, right? And so you hit that opportunity, you take those opportunities and you say, all right, rather than wait to be asked, I submitted proposals and did. And that's another element to think about as you're building your career and you're thinking to that next step. A lot of times it's taking that initiative to do something different and new that's going to put you on that path. Speaking of something different and new, that took me to a company at the time called Zinch. And Zinch was, for many who may not be familiar because it was so long ago at this point, was a company that was started and the idea that students are more than a test score, and they can create a profile to showcase themselves to institutions based on their values, based on what they want to go to school for, what their interests are. And then rather than just buy lists from SAT or ACT, institutions could invest in reaching students on this platform. The technology was rather early. And if you remember Zinch, throw it in the chat and share any stories that you have, good and bad. There were definitely some early technology challenges with messaging and posting of content and creating of content. But that company was later acquired by Chegg. And if you're familiar with Chegg, that company started out as a textbook rental company, which as a business model is not necessarily the strongest when you think back in those days, the two main times that the company would get revenue is in spring semester and fall semester when students were renting textbooks. So they acquired companies like Zinch to reach students across the entire student life cycle, from the moment they start thinking about college to when they're actually graduating and getting jobs. They bought internships.com and have done a lot with skills. And so that company has evolved over the years. Later, I was then spun off to NRCCUA, which at the time was called the National Research Center for College and University Admissions. NRCCUA is now known as Encora. NRCCUA was a great opportunity for me to work with the EdVentures research team, developing new content. I like to joke that NRCCUA bought the Chegg enrollment business because I came with it to help with the R, which is the research in NRCCUA. But over that time, we created a lot of great content that company is still using to this day, as far as insights and student reports and content. And so we launched the Encora platform while I was there. And then I wanted to get back to something earlier, and this might be a company that some folks are familiar with. I went to a smaller company based outside of Boston called Platform Q Education. I started as their VP of marketing. Quickly over time, that company grew pretty fast during that 3-year period, because that was when COVID hit, and when Platform Q Education was focused on virtual engagement, video, online events. And so many institutions were, and so call it kind of right place, right time from a growth perspective, I guess. I get not really a positive, since it was on the back of a global pandemic, but we saw a lot of great results and growth there as well. And finally, in my full-time roles, I then wanted to go back to a startup after Platform Q started shifting its focus to their healthcare division. I went to a company called EdSites, and what EdSites focused on was student persistence and retention. So I up until this point, my entire career, I had focused on getting students into college. but never really spent a lot of time focused on helping and supporting them once they were there. And so what EdSites allowed me to do was really learn a lot about the key drivers that impact student persistence and retention, and really understand that process. But then from there, I kind of had that realization as a marketing leader at these smaller tech companies, that oftentimes when these institutions or these companies are hiring leadership level marketing folks, they don't have the resources to support the hire as well as the actual execution of the plan that person wants to pursue. So I started my own company called GR7 Marketing. GR7 Marketing, for those who are familiar with the Enneagram personality test, I'm an Enneagram 7. If you know your Enneagram score, go ahead and throw that into the chat, because that's always a fun one to understand what people are. But we are, what my company does now is I help EdTech companies of all shapes and sizes with telling their story and supporting student success. So I specifically work with companies that are doing cool and fun and innovative things that are good for students, and ultimately then good for institutions. So along the way, I've been able to host a podcast and do a lot of other fun things. But I think the key lesson here to impart before we hop into the kind of meat of the conversation is, I started GR7 Marketing in many ways because of a failure. I was working full-time at a company that ran out of resources to support marketing leadership and marketing execution. And so I had to make a choice. Do I go back to another small startup and pursue that opportunity again and probably find myself in the same situation? Or do I start my own thing and kind of control my own destiny in a lot of ways? And so I decided at that point to focus on that. Leanne, you don't need to say ugh because you're a number 6. I think that sixes are great. I'm just not. So that's my story. That's how I got here. And once again, I over the years, Capture is one of those companies that I have admired and loved working with, and as a partner in a variety of capacities. And so I'm excited to be here today. The one tactical thing I'm going to walk into today before we level it up a little bit is, I want to get a better understanding and help kind of get a picture for where everyone is with respect to newer initiatives and newer technologies. I presented on a webinar a couple of months ago and at a conference about a month ago on this idea that oftentimes what we do is we try to take new initiatives and we try to put them in existing buckets. And while that can work philosophically, it doesn't necessarily work in practice. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a quick video. So if you're multitasking, this is a perfect time to come back into the screen and check out the video, because it is definitely one of my favorites. It's under this common theme of, as higher ed institutions, we oftentimes, or nearly every time, try to measure any new initiative that we do by bucketing it into one of 3 processes. Does this help us with generating more inquiries? Does it help us with generating applications, or does it help us with generating deposits? And for an innovator who's trying to think about ways that this might help to make things different and better and special, that can be frustrating because not everything fits into these existing buckets. So I'm going to share this video, and I'd love your thoughts and commentary as we go, and then we'll come back.
This is a square. Can you guess which spot that goes in?
Square.
That's right. It goes in the square hole.
Yeah.
And how about this rectangle? That one
Also,
goes in there too.
yeah,
Up next, we've got this thin rectangle.
the thin
You guess
rectangle,
where that goes?
the thin
That's
rectangle.
right. It goes in the square hole. And up next, a cylinder.
Circle.
I think that goes in
The circle.
the square hole. Now, we've also got this semicircle right here. Do you see a slot that would fit
The
the
semicircle.
semicircle?
The semicircle.
That's right, it's the square hole. Okay, up next, the triangle. We know what hole that goes into,
Triangle.
right?
Triangle.
That's right, square hole. And up next, we have the arch.
Arch. Arch.
You guessed it,
Arch.
it goes in the square hole.
So I share that video because of her face, right? And Ryan, you mentioned it in the chat. It's just you feel her pain because she wants you to use a different path and a different process. But when we push everything into one, now everything made it in its way, but did we learn? Did we do it the way that the tool was intended? Probably not. And so we don't get as much gratification as we would had we done it the appropriate way that it was designed or laid out. And I think that happens a lot with technology tools and resources, where we try to use it for something that it was not designed for, try to back it in. And so while we can make it work, it causes a lot of stress and anxiety, particularly with the people who designed it or see it the way that it's supposed to have that impact. And so I think one of the things the key challenge that we run into as an industry is we keep sorting new approaches into old processes. And when it comes to adopting new innovations, that can be a challenge, because there are some things that are just going to change the way that we operate, or should change the way that we operate. And if we don't allow it to, or identify the ways that it can, it's going to create issues for our staff and issues for our teams, or worse, be a missed opportunity to better support our teams and better support each other. So two of the big things that are coming out, and I saw Mike posted sent a note around it. Make sure that your settings in the chat are set to everyone if you want to share with everyone, versus just the panelist or the host, to make sure that everyone can see it if you have input you want to share, especially when we get to those checkpoints. So this is really kind of, this is a technology adoption life cycle. If you worked in business or marketing, you've probably seen something like this or this before. But really, oftentimes every technology goes through this life cycle in some way. Mobile web was in this at one point. Social media was in this at one point. Digital advertising was in this at one point. Video as a method of engagement was in this at one point. Right now, we have two really big innovators. One's a process one, and one's a technology one that is also a process one. Direct admissions and AI, right? Direct admissions defined as the process of admitting students to the institution without them formally submitting an application form, and AI, of course, being AI. And I think one of the things to really think about here from a fear of failure perspective, oftentimes in past adoption life cycles, we've been able to push away the things that we weren't completely comfortable with for longer than maybe other industries have, right? Because of how entrenched higher education is in today's world, right? The issue is with things like AI and just access to educational content in general, that's going to change, right? And so as institutions, we need to be prepared for finding ways to leverage AI in our everyday work, and also identifying if processes like direct admission, as they are currently deployed, are the most effective method for better supporting students. I'm not going to get into the weeds on both of these for my conversation today. I want to really focus on you as people and helping to kind of accelerate career progression and that mindset. But this is an area where I candidly I have curiosity around for folks. And also I think are two big items that are on the path to either crossing that chasm or falling into it. I have my own thoughts on where each of these are and how quickly that'll happen. But this is our first checkpoint, right? I want to understand from you in the chat or in the Q&A, whichever one you feel more comfortable posting into. I'll be honest, I have easier visibility into the chat. So let's try to use that one if we can. But where are you at your institution on the adoption curve when it comes to the use of AI? And what are your thoughts on direct admission? These are two really big hot topic items that I talk to many folks all the time about, that are impacting our processes, impacting how we do our work, impacting how we think about student engagement and student success. So I'd love any thoughts that you might have on either of these topics in the chat, and start having the conversation with each other around this topic. I'm totally cool being your background noise as you debate the validity or the use of direct admission, as you debate how much you want to use AI for specific things in your job. Mike just posted he's willing and waiting, looking for extra resources. And I think one of the things to think about is, the basic level of ChatGPT is free, right? And so I would encourage you to think about, what can I use this for beyond just rewrite this email or create a better call to action? But what are some processes that you can use that you can innovate when it comes to financial aid, when it comes to event planning and coordination? And then things like direct admission, sure, subscribing to a platform for them costs resources and investment, but is not adopting it costing you more in enrollment growth and impact than finding a way to make it work from a performance-based perspective, or how you can better incorporate it into your plans. So let's have a conversation on that while I kind of get us started on the topic du jour, which is really that idea and that concept of failing forward. And as I said on the opening slide, failing forward is better than falling behind. And what I mean by that is that means progress. That means we're learning as we go. I think one of the things, and this is one of the best quotes around letting fear dictate our decisions. Franklin Roosevelt said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I would say that another quote that may be a little bit closer in currency as far as relevancy comes from The Dark Knight, which is why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up. I use this quote all the time when I'm coaching my kids' hockey teams, because when you're talking to a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid who's on skates for the first time and they fall down, they need to learn that falling down is helping them learn how to stand on their skates, because now they have to get up once they've fallen down, right? And so we run into this same kind of conversation in our everyday life with, why are we so afraid of trying something new or stepping forward? Is it because leadership hasn't empowered us, or is it something within ourselves, or is it something in the middle where we need to understand and be able to take those risks? Submitting that conference proposal is something that is a very low risk piece for you as an individual. The worst thing that could happen is it could get denied. And the only people that really know it gets denied when you submit it are you and the people who evaluated it. The best thing that could happen is you can get it accepted, and now you've got to do the work to actually fulfill on the promise of the presentation you've submitted. So don't be afraid of trying and pushing yourself forward when it comes to getting yourself out there in your career, because none of these things are permanent. You can typically, unless you do something really bad, but typically no one single mistake is going to completely derail your institution or your career. So getting back to the admission space for a moment, what I keep hearing, and this is in that same realm of AI and direct admission and all these sorts of new technologies, when I'm talking to folks, what I hear all the time is applications are up. Great. We love that. That means we can report to US News and World Report that we're more selective, and we can show demonstrated interest in the institution. So when we need to get a loan from the bank for a new residence hall, we can point to that metric. Hey, people keep applying, right? And that leads to, of course, for many institutions, admits being up. I mean, completed applications are up, admits are up, direct admission's a thing, so of course admits are up. But then at the end of the day, and I would love to hear from you in the chat, is enrollment down or in line with last year? There are examples of institutions where enrollment is way up and you're doing great, and that's awesome. But I would say on average, we're seeing an issue where applications are up, admits are up, and enrollment is either flat or down. And that is not a sustainable issue. And what that does is creates counselors that look like this every single day. And so this creates that paradox of, the more work, but we also have the same size team, right? Or the more work and the same net result. Either way, we're living in a situation where we have to find a way to be more efficient with our time, more efficient with our resources, and more efficient with our most valuable asset, which is our people. And to do that, we're going to have to try new things and stop being afraid of something not working. I've said for years, when it comes to efficiency of use of resources, nobody gets fired for buying more search names, but they do get fired when they scale back and try to do new things, and those things don't work. We need to find a way to cut out 10% of our budget for innovation, right? And we can do that by looking at the areas where there are less outcomes for the effort and start to scale back on the things that we know aren't working. I said at the beginning, one of the challenges is every year we have the issue of, well, this year's an outlier because of the FAFSA fiasco. So we're going to do the same things we did because it was the FAFSA fiasco. We have the same issue a couple years ago. Oh, well, COVID was impacting enrollment. We're just bouncing back from that. We have to get back to the things that were working before. Well, at some point, we have to not have excuses around innovation. We have to say, what are we going to do to where are we going to invest? And Mike said in the chat, an innovation budget, right? And it doesn't, maybe it can't be 10%, maybe it can be 5%. Reality is the vendors in the space that are leading innovation and have the great ideas are looking for case studies. They're looking for partners to help them with developing that platform so it's super successful. I talk to founders and CEOs all the time who are open to conversation around budget when it comes to better supporting the outcomes and the building, especially with new technology. So you find a way to try something new and be okay if it fails. Not everything's going to be a success, and not everything has to be a success. So that's the next checkpoint for this conversation. What processes do you have that are ripe for innovation, right? I saw mentions of Slate AI features for messaging with students. I would love to have to see some conversation around what are the things that are ripe for innovation, and also what are the things that you're doing to innovate your process. Are you using AI in creative ways? I think many folks attend these types of events and programs because they want to get a better understanding from their peers about what's working and what's not working. What have you tried recently that is kind of a sticking point for everyone? And how do you build on those failures to get to a success? And so the next video I'm going to share while you're chatting it up comes from Steve Jobs' 2005 Stanford commencement address, which talks about how he built on a series of failures to find a success.
My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, It just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking, don't settle.
Keep looking, don't settle. I think one of the things that really comes through in that speech is that do what you love. And for many of us, we do what we love. Now it's the situation we don't. Sorry, I had to cough there, but I found my audio. So
My second,
I think one of the things to think about too, especially on the heels of that speech, is we know success is not final. Steve Jobs did a great job building a company, then he got fired from it. But we also understand that failure is not fatal. One of the other things we know is that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And that's a paraphrased quote from Michael Scott for our Office fans. Excuse me. I legit almost left it as the Wayne Gretzky quote, but I could not help myself when it came to this slide. One of the things to think about from kind of that failure to innovate or failure to take those opportunities is it goes back to that point that I made earlier about going backward, right? Or missing those opportunities. We are in higher education, we are in a very unique place right now where we understand that, and I'm not going to go deep into, again, data on this, but there's diminishing demographics. There are the demographic cliff. There are increases in competition with respect to finding other opportunities beyond just our traditional undergraduate education or graduate programs. There's skills-based credentialing, there are micro-credentials, there are certificate programs. And if we aren't innovating as institutions, we are going to fall behind. So we need to take those chances. You know, there are examples of this throughout history, right? Blockbuster losing to Netflix, Kodak as a company losing to digital cameras, you know, Toys R Us. Now Toys R Us comes back every year with Macy's now, but that in and of itself is an innovation, right? These are examples that we have of companies and programs failing because of not taking risks and not taking that effort. So we are in a situation now where we either need to take those risks or we're going. So I'll take a step back. A lot of times we've said we taking a risk is going to put us in a situation where we're going to close our doors and lose our jobs. The reality is by not taking any action, that's what's going to put us in the position where we're going to have to close our doors and lose our jobs. So we've got to make changes. So I'll challenge you again as this checkpoint to really think about, when was the last time that you took a big risk? And this can be in your career, it can be in your office, it can be in your life. And what happened, right? I would love to hear success stories in the chat. I would love to, if you're brave enough to also share failures. I think failures are a great one. I'll share an oldie but a goodie. Is we had just, when I was at the University of New Haven, this was right when we were in the midst of bouncing back from contracting enrollment and really focusing on growth. I was in charge of promoting our social media presence, right? And so I created an account on Facebook for Charlie the Charger, who was our mascot at the time. And we did a big promotional push around being a friend with Charlie the Charger on Facebook. Now, this was back when Facebook was like the thing, right? There was no TikTok, there was no Instagram, there was no any of this other stuff. And so we even did a print piece that said, find Charlie the Charger on Facebook, be our friend. One day I'm sitting in my office and I get a friend request from Charlie the Charger. And I said, that's weird. I'm Charlie the Charger. Why am I getting a friend request for myself? So I looked at the profile and I realized, oh, this profile is a spoof account. Somebody copied our account and I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So I reported it to Facebook. Both accounts got taken down. Why? Because Charlie the Charger is not a person. Charlie the Charger is a mascot. And that was against Facebook's policies and terms and conditions. At the time, there were no Facebook pages. This was one of the reasons why Facebook pages happened. I'll take credit for it. And so, of course, this happened the day after we sent that mailer to our entire prospect pool, encouraging them to find us on Facebook. That's a pretty big failure of resources, time, and effort. But at the end of the day, we ended up breaking all our enrollment goals. The university's Facebook page got a giant following, and so it all worked out, right? And so even in those situations where you fail, you still find success. And this will be the last video that I show, or second to last video that I'll show, that kind of will drive that point home.
Someone wasn't shot to my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 6 out of I didn't take the game winning shot. And missed. Why? Succeed.
Other than being a Nike commercial for a break, I think one of the things to really take home here from that commercial is you can't let a setback stop you from doing the next thing. And a lot of times that failure helps you to get better. Missing a shot helps you to learn the right way to take a shot. Falling down on your skates helps you to learn how to stay up on your skates. Sending out a mailer to a group of prospects isn't going to completely kill your entire recruitment campaign. In fact, it creates an opportunity for additional engagement. So thinking about that from an engagement perspective. Oh, here goes that one again. The last piece that I'll touch on is this concept of, I like to say urgency drives innovation, or urgency drives change. Albert Einstein said, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. The issue that we run into in higher education, and I mentioned this before, is this concept of incremental change. We've been able to, as a group of institutions and as an industry, be able to kind of lean on small steps forward when we're with technology where it is and the rapid innovation that's happening there, that it's time to kind of bail on incremental change. It's time for us to be bold and be innovative. So my impassioned request to you all is to take that home and say, what are things that we're kind of on the fence about, and what can we hop into to drive our programs and our institutions forward successfully? Because as I've said numerous times throughout the conversation today, if we aren't moving forward, we're moving backward. The last video that I'll share with you, and this is Simon Sinek. If you've been in the marketing circles for a while, this is the golden circle, and this will be a good entree into my final request and challenges for you all today.
I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean, what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why did your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh.
And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done. That's how most sales is done. And that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do. We say how we're different or how we're better. And we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase of vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat screen TVs. They've been making flat screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. And then Dell came out with MP3 players and PDAs. And they make great quality products, and they can make perfectly well-designed products, and nobody bought one. In fact, talking about it now, we can't even imagine buying an MP3 player from Dell. Why would you buy an MP3 player from a computer company? But we do it every day. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. When we communicate from the outside in, yes, people can understand vast amounts of complicated information like features and benefits and facts and figures. It just doesn't drive behavior. When we communicate from the inside out, we're talking directly to the part of the brain that controls behavior, and then we allow people to rationalize it with the tangible things we say and do. This is where gut decisions come from. Sometimes you can give somebody all the facts and your figures, and you say, I know what all the facts and details say, but it just doesn't feel right. Why would we use that verb? It doesn't feel right, because the part of the brain that controls decision-making doesn't control language. And the best we can muster up is, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Or sometimes you say you're leading with your heart, or you're leading with your soul. Well, I hate to break it to you, those aren't other body parts controlling your behavior. It's all happening here in your limbic brain, the part of the brain that controls decision-making and not language. But if you don't know why you do what you do, and people respond to why you do what you do, then how will you ever get people to vote for you or buy something from you, or more importantly, be loyal?
So I'll challenge you to think, what is your why in your current role? And how can we apply that to ignoring that fear of failure, right? And supporting our teams and being a part of the higher ed industry and its success. And so I know we're pressed on time, but I've got one last item to note to you today is stuff for you to think about. And this is your homework assignment, is what will you do, right? So once you understand your why when it comes to your role, I would say, what now will you do? I threw my son in here on this picture because he's a really good example of, one, a kid that loves to eat ice cream, but two, a kid that can focus on putting in the work and loving what he does. He loves baseball, hockey, and puts in the work to do all of those things and to be successful. And one of the things that he has as a 9-year-old child is he doesn't have that fear of failure. He just continues to push forward. So I think in a lot of ways, we need to get back to thinking about how we can apply that type of passion that a kid has for earning ice cream by putting his best effort forward into the work that we do every day. And remember, failure is usually not permanent. We can, what failure should do is help us to learn, to move forward so that we get better and better each and every time we try. So with that, I will say, remember what Albert Einstein said: do not go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path, and leave a trail. Let's stop sticking to our existing processes and plans, and let's really think about how we can better support each other and support student outcomes. So with that, I will turn it back to the Capture team, and thank you for your time today.
Gil, we have a couple minutes left for questions. So if anybody has a question and wants to put it in the Q&A, we'd love to see that. And I would love to ask you just a question that we've seen, which is, and I think you addressed this a little bit, but specifically, what advice do you give someone who's just starting their career in higher ed and who may feel overwhelmed by the pace of change?
I think one of the things that's nice is that by and large, many of the newer folks in higher ed, you don't know any different from the legacy baggage of the past 15 or 20 years. So you have an opportunity to be a part of leading that change and really take advantage of that opportunity, because the reality is in 20 years from now, there's going to be other people who are going to be coming in, and there's always something new every year, right? And so don't be afraid to take a leadership role in a leadership position. And know some of that's driven by your institution's culture, right? If you're a first year admissions counselor and you have a vice president who is risk averse or averse to change, that can be a challenge. But I feel like one of the things that you can do in your role as a new person is be that voice of innovation and that voice of change, and take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way outside of your day-to-day job.
I think that's fabulous. I think that's great. In the interest of time, I just want to say thank you, Gil. I, along with a lot of people who are in the chat, are saying it's inspiring. I was inspired. Very, very thoughtful presentation. Thank you. Really appreciate you joining us and sharing your perspective.
Yes, thank you, and thank you all. Find me on LinkedIn if you want to keep that conversation going.